Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for 13 the Musical. So this film, we do center on Evan Goldman. He is somebody who he's lived in New York pretty much all of his life, but his parents have recently gotten divorced, and as such, his mom is upending all of them to Walkerton, Indiana, where he now wants to do what he can to try to make friends, especially with his 13th birthday coming up. Evan is intent to make sure that there are people that are going to attend his bar mitzvah, and the rest of the film is pretty much him kind of navigating throughout this journey, but also, kind of discover things about himself along the way. And I was very excited going into this movie. 13 the Musical, I think, is a very underrated, not underrated, but very overlooked Broadway show. I don't hear a lot of people talk about it, but I think it's one of the best coming-of-age shows of its kind. There aren't a lot of shows out there that are primarily dealing with, kids transitioning into teenagers and things like that, and kind of showing the trials and tribulations that they go through, but also kind of, showing this, these really great universal messages of friendship and trust and things like that. I was very excited to see how they would adapt that in this film, because I feel like it's a show that just a lot of people that did not grow up around the time it came out, are aware of, and I was excited to see how it was going to turn out. And then the marketing happened, and ever since then, I have been very, very trepidatious going into this film. I've been significantly more trepidatious going into this film because I just felt like there was a lot here that just very much didn't feel like 13 the Musical. It very much felt like just a typical sort of generic Netflix family film. It didn't really seem like there was any sort of particular style, and the marketing itself just wasn't really selling me all that much. But I still was trying to have a lot of hope. There haven't been a lot of musical films this year. This is one of the few that are out there, and it's a show that I particularly really do enjoy quite a bit. So I was really pulling for this one, really hoping this could be a really strong musical adaptation, especially after the year we just had with so many incredible musical films. I was really hoping the streak could continue, and unfortunately, 13 the Musical, I think, is best described as how not to do a musical adaptation. This is the kind of film that has been completely just mutilated and sanitized into something that is almost completely unrecognizable from its source material. But we're gonna get into all, and honestly ends up being a far more forgettable film than I think it really could have been. But we're just getting into right now, starting off with the cast here. And this is easily one of the best elements, I think, of the original musical. There's so much talent that has ushered from that original show. Graham Phillips, Al Calderon, but of course, most notably are Liz Gillies and Ariana Grande. Just a really stellar cast overall. And, going into this, I was really hoping that this film could be on a similar level, where we see a lot of actors that we haven't seen before, but really are able to showcase their inner talents. And for the most part, yeah, I think this cast very much does deliver. I think it's one of the better parts of this movie. I think everyone does do a really good job. Starting off with Eli Golden, who does play Evan in this movie, does a really good job in this film. He really does command the screen every single time he's on. He's very likable in the role. He's somebody that you do find yourself very much gravitating towards, and I think overall he did give a very strong performance here, especially because with the material he's given, he is able to elevate the material very well here. I really was a fan of his performance in the movie. I definitely do see him going very far, and in terms of singing talents and things like that, he's got that all down pat, and I really liked what he did within this film. Same goes for Gabriella, who plays Patrice. I've never really seen her before either, but she is great in this movie. I think that she has a real presence to her. She's somebody who has again, kind of complex role, and I think that she does handle it very well. I like what she was able to do here. J.D. McCrary, I have seen before in some things, but he is an immediate standout in this film. I mean, what a showman of a young actor this kid really is. I mean, he just shines every time he is on screen. He does such a great job in this role. You love Brett. He's very likable in that way, and I just really loved what he was doing here. I think he was easily one of the biggest standouts of this film for me. I really liked what he was doing here. All the cast really does do a great job. But without question, for me, the standout of this film is Frankie McNellis, who does play Lucy, who is fantastic in this film. Lucy is the kind of character that, yes, we have seen a lot of times before. We've seen the mean girl in a lot of, shows and films like this. But what makes Lucy stand out, I think, is, Liz Gillies' performance in the original show. Somebody who is so cunning, so assertive, but also is so determined to get what she wants. And McNellis, I think, really does represent that very well, but also simultaneously does enough to make this character her own. Yes, Lucy is very ruthless in the way she goes about things, but the way McNellis performs it is much different, and that's something I really just appreciated about her performance. I felt like she, more than anybody, was giving the most effort within this film. It really felt like Lucy is somebody that she was trying to, in her own way, kind of reinvent this character. Whenever she's on screen, the film just becomes so much more alive in that way. There's such an energy to it. There's such an incredible presence to her, and she, by far, was the standout of this entire film for me. She's very funny to watch, but she also is just very impressive with the range she's able to give within this performance. I haven't really seen her before this, but I think she's definitely going to be someone to watch out for in future films, because I really loved what she ended up doing here. All of the young actors, I think, do a really good job within this film. But of course, we also have to talk about the adult actors that are in this movie, because unlike the Broadway show, which consists entirely of just 13-year-old, preteen actors, the movie changed it up a bit to where now we do have some adult actors in here, and they do what they can. I think Rhea Perlman, is a really great actress, and she definitely does have some really good stuff to work with within this film. Josh Peck is really not in this movie a lot, but I think he does enough to where he is a standout. And Debra Messing, I think, is good here for what she does in this movie. Again, she doesn't really have a ton, she does play a pretty big role in this film as Evan's mom, and I think she does do a pretty good job, as does everybody. I don't think there's a weak link within this cast overall. And I think for all the things that this film fails at, for all of the faults that it has, the cast is what keeps it watchable. This cast is very energetic, they're very fun, very lively, and I think we have a lot of actors here that we should definitely be on the lookout for in the coming years, because I think overall this was a very strong ensemble for sure. Alright, but now let's get to the directing and the writing, because this is where we get to the areas of the film that really just don't work that well. Tamra Davis in this movie, her directing in this film, I really just don't think is all that great. I understand that she is obviously trying to adapt off of the, original musical and whatnot, and she's kind of doing her own thing, but my biggest issue with her is she just doesn't really have that much of a style when it comes to this film. It feels like she didn't really have much of an idea of what to really do with this. I didn't really feel like there was any specific vision from her. It just feels very basic. A lot of her directing feels more something in line with like a TV movie or like a Disney Channel movie or something like that. It didn't really feel like she herself did anything to really elevate this film. I didn't feel like watching this like, yeah, Tamara Davis was an amazing choice for this film. Tamara Davis added so much to this movie. I just didn't really feel that at all. It feels like she herself just didn't really understand the material that she was given here at all. Especially, as we get further into the film, I just think there was a lot of things that she could have done here. When it comes to the comedy in this movie, a lot of it is just very easy jokes. A lot of it just didn't really land all that well for me. And then when the film tries to get a little bit more emotional towards the end, it just feels kind of forceful in that way. So again, I think this film, they needed a more dynamic director to come in and really have this vision of their own to really make this stick out. I feel like that's what worked so well with so many of the really good musical adaptations last year. You look at Steven Spielberg or, what he was able to accomplish with West Side Story. I think is the most, notable example of that. I think he, had so much passion in that film. Same with John M. Chu and In the Heights, and Tamara Davis in comparison just doesn't really have that same energy. It didn't really feel like she really had that much passion for this film, and it was very disappointing directing overall. But by far, the biggest issue with this movie, and the things that really just bothered me about this film, and what really, I think, sinks this entire movie, is the screenplay, which honestly is one of the weakest for any musical I have seen in a long time. Now, look, I want to start off by saying, I understand when you are transferring a Broadway musical that there are going to be certain changes that you have to make, because by design, they're just not going to work as well. You know, things need to be retooled, scenes need to be redone, scenes need to be expanded upon, you have to have a little more character work maybe that wasn't there within your musical, and I really don't have a problem with that. Especially when it comes to film, I think a lot of the times they do things to add on to certain characteristics or certain nuances that were explored within the musical that maybe they weren't able to do as well, and now that they have a different medium, they can explore it differently. And I'm all for them changing things, but it has to be said, what you have to make sure when you are changing things within a musical adaptation that you do that with the knowledge of what is this show really trying to do? What was the point of the show overall? Are we still achieving that same goal? And honestly, I really don't think they understood it at all. 13 the Musical, yes, can be very generic at points. Yes, it is a show that we have seen a lot, but I think what really makes it work is the edge that that show really did have. I mean, it wasn't afraid to go into some very, important topics and things like that, and yes, I understand a transfer. It has to go smoothly. It has to be more accessible to other audiences, but it really feels like there has been so much that was changed within the story to where it doesn't even feel like the same show anymore. I mean, right off the bat, basically every story beat has been completely cut in half within this movie. One of the biggest examples of this is one of the main storylines we're focusing on is Evan and his friendship with this girl, Patrice. This is the first girl that he ends up meeting. They become very close friends over the summer, and eventually he ends up going to, meet the other more popular kids, within the school, and this kind of puts a rift within their friendship. The reason this, unfortunately, and on paper, that sounds like, oh, this could be a really interesting story, falls completely flat. And the reason why it flatlines for me is because there is no time really given to develop the budding relationship between these two. It quite literally is done over a montage. We see a scene of Patrice showing Evan all these different, hot spots and things like that within the town. The lamest place in the world. Great song. Always love hearing it, but you gotta do more than just that. You have to get me to really latch on to these two characters, and this film just really didn't do that at all. I didn't feel like I really got to know their friendship, that I really cared about the two of them, and if I did, and that moment happens, then yeah, maybe it would have been effective, but they really didn't do a good job with that at all. So as a whole, right off the bat, I didn't really care about the main sort of friendship within this movie. They really didn't do a good job with that here at all, and I think that was something that really does bring this film down. And that really goes for pretty much every storyline within this movie. One of the most prominent aspects of the original musical is the idea that, these jocks and the popular kids and things like that are just complete jerks. And they are really just here and they're kind of using Evan as like the new kid. They really are only latching on to him when he presents to them something that they find exciting. The writer of this movie said, well, fuck all that, we'll just make them nice now. And that's not a terrible idea. I don't hate the fact that these characters are just nice. The problem is, when you completely erase that trait from them, it feels like they had nothing to do beyond that. So these characters are just nice now. And really the problem becomes when the film is still trying to follow the same type of plotline as the original show. In the original show, Patrice is upset at Evan, and it's understandable because of the fact that these are not good people, that Evan completely just, they are excluding Patrice from joining their friend circle and things like that. Patrice has seen them mistreat her and things like that, mistreat others throughout the school. In this film, though, it really feels like a lot of the time Patrice is going just based off of assumptions, because we see very early on in this movie characters like Brett, characters like Kendra, characters that aren't Lucy. Lucy's really the only one that still has that mean streak in her, but everybody else are just nice, easygoing people. There's really nothing to be fearful of. There's nothing to be there's nothing to be upset about, and it really makes Patrice come off very unlikable in this film. I really did not like Patrice in this movie because it felt like she had this assumption. She had this sort of, she had this feeling in mind that, oh, you can't associate with these people, and so because of that, I'm just gonna unfriend you. I'm gonna get mad at you for this, and it just didn't feel like a natural character arc. There's never a point in this movie where there's anything to justify why Patrice feels the way that she does. If there was, then I wouldn't be complaining, but there isn't within this movie, and I think that's something that really hurt this film. I honestly found Patrice to be very unlikable in this movie because now she just kind of wants Evan all to herself. That's what it feels like, and it just isn't justified. And so, like I said, that friendship itself, it just feels very underwritten. It's very hard to latch onto, and the other characters in this movie, I wouldn't say are completely horrible, but there's just really nothing to them. Brett, for example, he's just a nice jock. That's all he really is. He wants to kiss Kendra. He seems to treat people nicely. He talks a little bit about dipping into I think he said something about writing and things like that, but that's really all we get with his character. What do we know about Kendra? Well, she's a really nice girl. She doesn't seem to take many risks within her life, and now there's an opportunity to do so, and she wants to kiss Brett, and she has a friendship with Lucy, and that's really all we know about this character. Even when it comes to, like I said, a character like Patrice has been completely cut in half. We don't even know much about her. Even Evan as a main character, we really don't know all that much about. Yes, he has a conflict of sorts, but that really brings me into my other big problem with this movie. There's barely a conflict here. I mean, the fact that a lot of these kids are not the mean-spirited, archetypes you would expect them to be, there really is nothing going on within this movie. Yes, you have Patrice and her anger at Evan for what he did, which she didn't really do much of anything at all, other than befriend them, because understandably he wants to make friends within this town. Aside from that, there just isn't really much of a conflict here. There's not really much going on, so the movie feels very aimless after a while. It doesn't really feel like we have much to really latch onto in this movie, and I don't think they did a very good job with that. I think it's a shame because there's a lot of story potential here, but the writers just didn't seem to recognize what they need to do in order to make this work. I do think there is a version of this movie where they made enough changes to where this still can work, but they are trying to still tell a similar story to the original show, and it just really doesn't work with how much they have changed within this movie. Even Lucy as a character, the reason she works as well as she does is because she's really one of the only characters that doesn't feel like she's been completely just butchered in that way. She still is the mean girl. She still is determined to get what she wants, but her story even feels very one-note. It really is just she's jealous of Kendra, she wants Brett all to herself, and that's really it when it comes to Lucy. There isn't really much more going on with her as a character, and so basically every character in this film just feels so incredibly one note, and I think that's what really does hurt this movie. I think, there was an opportunity to really showcase these characters and get us to latch onto them, but the movie makes no such attempt. It is so desperate to get to the next scene, and I don't think they did a really good job with that at all. At points, it feels like the story has been so butchered, the movie feels borderline unfinished. There are multiple conversations in this movie that we needed to see, that the movie just doesn't let us see, and I just didn't really understand that. Any chance we have to kind of give certain nuances or shed light on these characters, the movie just skips out on. It's so baffling to me. Why did you even make these changes in the first place if you weren't going to do anything with them? I can understand, again, that you wanted to change things up, but it really just felt like the movie had no idea of what it wanted to do, and as a result, it's probably one of the most poorly written musical films I've seen in a very long time. But the other big thing that hurts this movie is what the film decides to add instead, because like I said, a change that they made within this film, a pretty major one, is that now we actually do have adult characters populating this movie, and I actually think that was an interesting idea. I think there's a lot that you can do with that. Unfortunately, the film doesn't really do much with it at all. There is a subplot within this film involving Evan's mom, and the way that the movie goes about it, I thought was just so incredibly lazy. Basically, every scene with her is exactly the same. She used to be a writer. She's not anymore. She's kind of just laying around the house doing nothing. Her mother is encouraging her to do more, but she seems apprehensive to do so. That's her entire subplot in the movie, and we get like 5 scenes of that. And after the second or third one, I was like, is this really it? Are you telling me you added this whole character to do absolutely nothing with? They don't do anything with her. She's really just here to mope around and just talk about how she used to be a writer and things like that, and they don't really do much of anything with her. It was just so unnecessary to me, and I wouldn't call the subplot itself unnecessary. It just doesn't add like anything to the film, and it just feels like fluff after a while. I mean, there's this comedy that's inserted that just doesn't really fit at all, and I get what they were trying to do. They were kind of trying to contrast Evan's mom with how Evan is feeling, but neither character is developed well enough to really make that parallel work, and so I think that really did end up hurting them. Every single opportunity they have to develop a compelling story, they completely fail at, because the movie doesn't want to go beyond a surface level of characters and of character development, and I think that's what really just ended up that really ended up hurting this movie, and what I think really just makes it so incredibly lackluster overall. There's some other characters here that have been just completely shafted in this movie. The character of Archie plays a pretty substantial role in the original musical. Here, he's really just like a funny little sidekick that the film will often cut to. That's really all he is. But he also kind of is the voice of reason. Like, he's the one giving Patrice that reality check, and I found myself kind of on Archie's side a lot, but I also felt like we just didn't get to see enough of him. So again, a lot of the writing here, it's either not very well handled, not really well developed at all, or it just feels like they didn't really understand the source material of this musical, what they were really trying to get at. It just didn't really work very much at all here. So I think basically everything they did kind of fell flat. When it comes to cinematography in this movie, I mean, it's okay. It looks like a very basic Netflix movie. There's nothing about it that really sticks out. It's well lit. There are some scenes that are interesting, I guess, from a cinematography perspective, but that's not really something that really sticks out in this film. Let's talk about the music in this movie, because yes, I understand, again, this is something that is going to have to change. You're not going to expect every song to be in there. I get that. I get that they have to sometimes rework some things around, maybe change the order of some songs. I have no problem with that. What I do have a problem with is removing almost half of the songs from your movie for virtually no reason at all. There are six songs in this movie that are just gone. They don't show up in this film at all, and the real problem I have with it is that those songs were there for a reason. Those songs were there to build character, to forward plot momentum, to get us to understand these characters a little more, present some insight that we otherwise would not have, and without it, it just feels like it's kind of missing. Archie's a very good example of this. He has this song called Get Me What I Need. It gets us to kind of understand, why he is constantly fixating on wanting to be with Kendra and things like that. But because it's not in the movie, we don't really care all that much about it. It Can't Be True is probably one of the most popular songs from the show, and for some reason it's cut out of this movie, which is incredibly baffling to me. But that's another one that very much should have been here, and for some reason is not. Even Getting Ready has been completely just demolished. There's like a minute, it's a minute long, it's very short, it leaves almost no impact whatsoever. All the interesting stuff between characters and them meeting up, for this movie and things like that, and how momentous of an occasion it is, you don't feel a single second of it, because for some reason they decided to cut it down to a minute, even though there is an extended version of the song, which again is almost sounds like a completely different song, but at least they still put the effort into it, and they can't even do that in the theatrical version for some reason. I have no idea why they decided to cut some of these songs out, not just because they're really good songs, but because they add a lot to the plotline here. What it means to be a friend is maybe the most essential song for Patrice, and it's not in the movie for some reason, even though Gabrielle ended up performing it. And there again, you can go on YouTube, they did film this scene. For some reason they just cut it out of the movie. Jason Robert Brown actually was in an interview, and he was talking about how he did not have a lot of control over this movie. There were a lot of changes that it seems like he was kind of dismayed about, and it's very easy to see why, because it feels like in place of that, they have now added some songs that either are veering too similar to what they cut, or don't really add much at all. I will say I've Been Waiting, I think, is a really good addition. It gets us to understand Brett and Kendra's, relation a little bit more, kind of root for them. I think it's a little fun song that they added. The Bloodmaster is now in place of All Hail the Brain, and I actually do like the Bloodmaster, but it pretty much is just a shorter version, like a shorter version, abbreviated version of All Hail the Brain. There really isn't too much different about it overall. And the new song that they had, It Would Be Funny, I just was not really a big fan of, mainly because I just didn't really care about the Debra Messing storyline, so that didn't really work much for me at all. But there really is no excuse for these songs to be cut. There really is no reason for them to not be here. So then the ones that they do have, do those ones stick out? Well, some of them do. I think Opportunity easily is the best musical number within the entire film. It's this great musical number showcasing Lucy and her inner desires, and there's a lot of great choreography with like the cheerleading team and things like that. It probably is the highlight of the entire film. If you're looking for something really energetic and fun, look no further than Opportunity. A Little More Homework, I think they understood that song enough to where I think it still does work in this movie. It's probably one of the most effective moments of this film. But then you have songs like Tell Her, for example, where half of that song is supposed to be Evan realizing his actions and apologizing to Patrice, but the things she calls him out for doing in the song, he never did to her in the movie. So, like, stuff like that, they really just should have rethought. Like, I don't know, how hard is it to go through lyrics and say, oh, maybe this doesn't fit anymore. Maybe we need to rewrite this to where it's something a little bit different. They did that for some of the songs in this movie, but they couldn't bother for some of the other ones. So again, even the musical numbers, I don't think stick out all that much to me. Some of them do. Bad Bad News has always been my favorite song in this show, and they still do a really good job with it. Yes, some of the lyrics have been changed to make it a little bit more PG in that way. But I still did enjoy what they ultimately did with that song, and I'm not going to complain too much because I do think that is one of the better, I do think that song is probably one of the lesser issues of this film. But overall, like I said, I think the musical numbers just really weren't the greatest here. A lot of them just felt very standard and wasted opportunities. They're also, some of them, mercifully short, and I think that also really did bring them down. Even the title song, 13 the Musical, the stuff that was fun about that song has been cut out to now try to fix, add context to a different story. And I didn't really like that at all. Anything that's even slightly edgy or questionable, the film is just completely just removed because they're trying to cater more to like a Disney Channel type demographic, which I think honestly was all wrong. I think a lot of the people who are gonna watch this movie are people who watch the musical. And they had those, songs in there for a reason. They delved into certain mature topics, and by removing them, it just feels not as meaningful. It feels like the film is trying to kind of hold back in that way, and it just isn't nearly as interesting to watch. The editing as well, I really was not a fan of. The movie, I think, is just way too short. There's so much more that they needed to dive into. There's so much more that they could have expanded upon, but the movie is so anxious to get to the next scene that it just feels like we never really have time to focus on anything. We don't really get a time to get to know these characters, to understand this situation. Hell, even give a reason for us to care about this situation. I don't think the movie does a good job really with any of that, and so a lot of it just feels very brief. I think that's alone is what makes this film feel so forgettable, is the runtime. I don't think they did a very good job with that at all here, and the way the movie ends as well just was very confusing. I don't really understand what this movie is trying to say. I understand what the original message of the musical is, but with how much was changed and retooled in this movie, the message just doesn't really work here anymore, and I don't think they did a very good job with that. Ultimately, 13 the Musical is just the perfect example of a property that has been, that, you know, was acquired, a musical that somebody wanted to do, but had virtually no understanding of what made it so good within the first place. The songs that are there are still really fun. There are some really good performances, especially Frankie McNellis. I think is going to be a big standout moving forward. I'm excited to see what she does in future films. There are some fun moments here, but overall this feels like a film that has been completely just butchered and sanitized and barely has any resemblance to the Broadway adaptation, the Broadway musical that it is adapting, and I think that's what really does bring it down. There's a ton of one-note characters. The things that they add don't really feel like they have any real impact whatsoever. The message itself isn't terribly communicated, but I don't think they did a great job with that. I understand the need to cut stuff out that may not be deemed as socially acceptable, but there need to be a lot that was reworked here to really make this feel even somewhat impactful. Instead, this just feels so cheaply made. It feels very uneventful and really just feels like something that was made just because they could. And I do feel like 13 the Musical is the kind of show that could have a really good movie, but because of the way this was handled, it really just ends up being, I think, easily one of the most forgettable musical films that I have seen in a very long time. This was extremely disappointing to me, and I am going to give it a C. Over, guys, to my review of 13 the Musical. Let me know if you guys saw this movie at all, left your thoughts, and I really don't see a lot of people talking about this movie, and I think that's also because Netflix just didn't do a great job marketing, as usual, but I was really excited for it, and it very much did let me down, but if you guys have seen it, let me know what you thought of it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.